I woke up gasping for air, my arms flailing against a suffocating wall of darkness. My fingers scraped against cold, damp wood, and the realization struck me like a thunderbolt: I was in a box. No, a coffin. My breathing grew ragged, and the sharp tang of earth filled my nostrils as I sucked in stale, thin air. Panic gripped me. I screamed, the sound muffled by the layers of dirt pressing down on me. Then I heard it, a whisper. "You're awake, James. Good. Now we can begin." The voice was disembodied, calm, and chillingly familiar. It echoed through the coffin, though it sounded as if it were right next to my ear. "This is your punishment." Punishment? For what? My heart thundered in my chest as I clawed at the wooden lid. Splinters pierced my fingers, but I kept digging. I couldn't remember anything: how I got here, why I was buried alive, or whose voice was haunting me. Then the whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Think, James. What did you do? Just 24 hours earlier, life was ordinary. Almost painfully so. I was a real estate agent in Raleigh, North Carolina. 41 years old, divorced, and stuck in a spiral of missed opportunities and forgotten dreams. The kind of man who smiled too much at strangers to hide the bitterness beneath. My days were spent hustling overpriced properties to couples who barely liked each other and spending my nights nursing whiskey and cheap takeout in a cramped apartment. The highlight of my week had been the Thursday night poker game at Marty's, my only semblance of a social life. Marty was an old friend from college, perpetually stuck in a midlife crisis with his neon beer signs and oversized pool table. That night, I'd played recklessly, trying to drown out the gnawing feeling that my life was slipping through my fingers. I lost more money than I could afford. To make it worse, Marty's smug grin as he raked in my chips had me biting my tongue to keep from snapping. On the way home, I took a detour through the old country road, hoping the quiet would calm me. It didn't. Instead, it reminded me of everything I'd failed to accomplish. The car radio buzzed with static as I drove. And then, nothing. I couldn't remember anything after that. But now, buried alive, the fragments of my life seemed trivial. The voice returned, sharper this time. "Think, James. Why are you here? What have you done?" "I don't know." I screamed, my voice cracking as I pounded against the coffin. But deep down, I did know. At least, part of me did. The voice didn't leave me alone. Its tone shifted, no longer calm but edged with a sinister glee that made my skin crawl. "James," it hissed, "you can't lie to yourself forever." I froze, my hands trembling against the coffin lid. Lie? About what? My mind raced, grasping at memories that slipped through my fingers like grains of sand. The last thing I remembered was the static-filled drive and that unnerving sensation of being watched. My heart pounded in the claustrophobic darkness, each thud echoing like a drumbeat in my skull. Sweat trickled down my neck, mingling with the dirt clinging to my skin. I clawed at the wood again, this time slower, deliberate. Maybe there was a weakness, a seam I hadn't noticed. Something. Anything. The voice interrupted my thoughts, mocking. "You think you can escape? How quaint. But tell me, James, where would you even go?" And then, the real horror began. The wood beneath my fingers moved. It wasn't much, a slight vibration, like the shiver of an insect under glass, but it was enough. Enough to make me yank my hands back as if burned. And then I heard it. A faint scratching noise. Not from within my box, but above me. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Something, or someone, was digging. Help! I screamed, hope flooding my chest. I'm down here. Please, help me. But the voice chuckled, low and menacing. Oh, James. You don't want them to find you. The digging grew louder, closer, until it was almost overhead. I held my breath, straining to hear past the pounding of my heart. Was it a shovel? A claw? And then, silence. Hello? I whispered, my voice cracking. A single, guttural growl responded. It wasn't human. The growling deepened, reverberating through the coffin. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that shook the wood and rattled my bones. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The noise seemed to come from everywhere, and I couldn't block it out. Do you hear them? The voice whispered. It was softer now, almost gentle. They're here for you. Who? I shouted. What are you talking about? The growling stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. My breathing slowed, and I dared to press my palm against the lid again. It was solid. Maybe I'd imagined the movement before. Maybe the growling was just my panic playing tricks on me. And then, with a deafening crack, the wood splintered. A rush of dirt poured in, filling the coffin with the acrid scent of earth. I screamed, twisting to avoid the falling soil. My lungs burned as the confined air grew thinner, and I coughed, choking on the dust. The crack widened, and a single, pale hand pushed through the gap. The skin was gray, stretched thin over bone, with jagged nails caked in dirt. It twitched, searching blindly, until it found my ankle. I kicked out in blind terror, my heel connecting with a sickening crunch. The hand recoiled, but I wasn't safe. The coffin shook violently now, as if the earth itself was alive, trying to swallow me whole. You can't escape, James, the voice taunted. You don't deserve to. I don't deserve this. I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I don't even know what I did. The voice sighed, almost pitying. Oh, but you do. The hand returned, joined by another. This one clawed at the edge of the crack, widening it inch by agonizing inch. Pale faces began to emerge, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They didn't speak, but their mouths opened and closed, as if screaming in silence. My mind fractured under the weight of their stares. Who were they? What did they want? James, the voice said, softer now. Do you recognize them? I shook my head violently, pressing myself against the far end of the coffin. No, I whispered, but the truth clawed at the edges of my mind. There was something familiar about those faces, even in their twisted, decayed forms. The first figure lunged, its skeletal fingers grasping my shirt. I fought back, thrashing wildly, but they were too strong. The others joined in, pulling me toward the widening crack. My screams echoed in the tight space, but no one would hear me. No one could save me. As they dragged me into the suffocating darkness, the voice spoke one last time. This is only the beginning, James. Do you see it now? Do you remember? And then, everything went black. When I woke again, I wasn't in the coffin. I was lying on a cold, stone floor in what looked like an old basement. A single, flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows across the damp walls. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of rust, or was it blood? For a moment, I thought I'd been rescued. Maybe someone had found me, pulled me out of the ground. But then I saw the scratches on the walls. Hundreds of them, overlapping like the desperate scribblings of trapped animals. A chair sat in the center of the room, dark stains seeping into the wood. Ropes hung loosely from its arms, frayed at the ends, as if someone, or something, had struggled violently against them. "You're awake again," the voice said, echoing through the room. I spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. My chest tightened. Where am I? What is this place? I shouted, my voice cracking. "This is the truth, James," the voice replied. "Do you see it yet?" "No," I snapped, anger bubbling beneath my fear. "You keep saying I deserve this, but I don't even know what this is." The voice chuckled, low and hollow. "Then look around. Think." I scanned the room, my mind racing. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled in dark, uneven letters. It wasn't ink. My stomach turned as I realized it was blood. The words were chaotic, repetitive: liar, thief, murderer. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not me. I'm not a murderer." "Not yet," the voice replied, chillingly calm. "But you will be." The room shifted around me, the walls breathing like living flesh. The light bulb flickered, casting momentary flashes of something, someone, standing in the shadows. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing toward the door. "What do you want from me?" The figure stepped into the light, and my breath caught. It was me. But not me. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken and hollow, his skin a sickly gray. He smiled, his teeth yellowed and sharp. "I'm you, James," the figure said. "The real you. The one you've tried so hard to bury." The figure lunged, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. My doppelganger laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the small room. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's not real." "But it is," he hissed, leaning closer. "You've spent your whole life pretending, haven't you? Pretending to be the good guy, the victim. But deep down, you know the truth." "No!" I screamed, covering my ears, but his words wormed their way into my mind. "You killed them, James," he whispered. "Your wife. Your daughter. The poker debt, the whiskey, it all came first, didn't it?" His words struck like a hammer, shattering the fragile walls I'd built in my mind. Memories rushed back in brutal, jagged fragments. My wife, Emily, begging me to come home that night. My daughter, Lily, crying as the car spun out of control. My hands shaking as I poured another drink to drown out their screams. "No," I whispered, collapsing to the floor. "It wasn't my fault. The storm." "Blame the storm all you want," the doppelganger sneered, crouching beside me. "But you made the choice. You let them die. And now, you'll pay the price." I looked up, tears streaming down my face. "What do you want from me?" "To remember," he said. "To suffer. Just like they did." The walls of the basement began to collapse, revealing a nightmarish landscape. Flames licked at the edges of my vision, consuming everything in their path. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning flesh and the sound of distant screams. And then I saw them. Emily and Lily, standing in the flames. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted in anguish. "James," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you save us?" "I tried." I screamed, reaching for her. "I swear I tried." But the flames grew higher, separating us. The heat was unbearable, searing my skin. I fell to my knees, sobbing. The doppelganger stood over me, his smile widening. "This is your punishment, James. To relive this moment, over and over, for eternity." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Please." But the flames consumed everything, and the last thing I heard was the voice, laughing. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the coffin. My breaths came in shallow gasps, the weight of the earth pressing down on me. It was as if nothing had happened, but the memories were still there, burning in my mind. The voice returned, softer now. "Do you understand, James? This is where you belong." "No," I whispered. "I'll get out. I'll make it right." "You can't," the voice replied. "This is your grave. And you dug it yourself." The oppressive silence in the coffin was almost comforting now, like a twisted embrace. My breathing had slowed, and for the first time since waking up, I wasn't clawing at the wood or screaming for help. I had accepted it. The voice returned, smooth and composed, as if it had been waiting for this moment. "Good, James. Acceptance is the first step." "First step to what?" I muttered, my throat raw from screaming. "To understanding," the voice said. "But before you can understand, you must remember everything." "I already did." I snapped. "I remember the accident. Emily, Lily," my voice broke as their names left my lips. "I know I failed them." The voice chuckled softly. "Oh, James. You still don't get it, do you?" The wood beneath me began to shift again, not breaking this time but folding, expanding. The coffin stretched impossibly, its boundaries melting into something vast and cold. I was no longer lying in a box but standing in a void, surrounded by a faint, otherworldly glow. The whispers began again, faint and overlapping, a chorus of voices rising from the darkness. They were calling my name, accusing, begging, screaming. And then, I saw them. Emily and Lily stood in the distance, their outlines flickering like a weak signal on an old TV. I ran toward them, my legs heavy, the space around me stretching and pulling like molasses. The closer I got, the more distorted they became. Emily's face shifted, her features melting and reforming, while Lily's eyes grew larger, darker, until they were empty voids. "Emily!" I screamed, reaching for her. "Please, I'm sorry." Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, her neck cracking like dry wood. "You're sorry?" she said, her voice layered with malice and mockery. "For what?" "For everything. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. I wasn't thinking." Her smile was cold, hollow. "You weren't thinking when you killed us, James." "I didn't kill you," I shouted. "It was an accident." The void trembled, and the whispers grew louder. Emily stepped closer, her distorted face inches from mine. "You really don't remember," she said, her tone almost pitying. The memories rushed back, not as fractured fragments but as a flood of clarity. It wasn't just the accident. It was the argument before. Emily begging me to stop drinking, to be better, for her, for Lily. The slap that echoed through the kitchen when I lost control. Lily crying in the corner. Emily threatening to leave. I did remember. I remembered grabbing the keys, Emily chasing after me, dragging Lily along because she wouldn't leave her behind. I remembered the storm, the blinding rain, the bottle of whiskey still in my lap as the car skidded off the road. "No," I whispered, backing away. "That's not how it happened." The void pulsed, the whispers crescendoing into a deafening roar. Emily's face twisted into a grotesque mockery of itself, her eyes wide and unblinking. "You chose the bottle over us, James," she hissed. "And when it was over, you couldn't even face what you'd done." Lily stepped forward then, her small hands clasped together, her voice soft but chilling. "Daddy," she said, "you left us there." I collapsed to my knees, the weight of her words crushing me. She was right. After the crash, I hadn't tried to save them. I'd crawled out of the wreckage, bloody and broken, and stumbled away, leaving them behind in the burning car. "You ran," the voice whispered, surrounding me now. "You've been running ever since." The void shifted again, and I was back in the coffin. But this time, it wasn't empty. A mirror was embedded in the lid, reflecting my face, or what was left of it. My skin was pale and gaunt, my eyes sunken and lifeless. I looked like the doppelganger from the basement. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The voice wasn't some external tormentor. It was me. My guilt. My shame. My true self, the part I'd buried deeper than the coffin. "This is your grave," the voice said again, now coming from my own lips. "And you put yourself here." The whispers quieted, replaced by a deafening silence. I stared at my reflection, and for the first time, I saw the truth. I wasn't buried alive as some punishment orchestrated by an outside force. This was my purgatory, my mind's final act of self-destruction. The coffin, the voices, the void, they were all me. And the worst part? I deserved it. The coffin began to fill with dirt, cold and suffocating. I didn't fight it this time. There was no point. As the last breath left my lungs, the voice spoke one final time, calm and resolute. "Now you understand, James. This is where you've always belonged." And then, there was nothing.